I am Helen. I am 92 years old now, and I need to tell you something honestly. Living alone is harder than people think, much harder than it looks from the outside. When I first became alone in this house, I thought I would enjoy it, the quiet, the freedom, the peace. But silence changes when it stays too long. It starts to feel less like peace and more like weight in the rooms around you. I would wake up and there would be no voice waiting for me, no footsteps in the kitchen, just the sound of my own breathing, and even that sounded louder than it should. I remember sitting at the edge of my bed some mornings, just trying to remember what I was supposed to do first, and sometimes I would laugh a little at myself because I used to be so organized, so full of rhythm, and then suddenly days began to blur together. One cup of tea would turn into a whole morning gone. I want you to understand this clearly. It does not happen in a dramatic way. It happens quietly, slowly, like a clock losing seconds you do not notice, until one day you realize you are not really living the day, you are just moving through it. And I will be honest with you, there were moments I felt afraid, not of dying, but of disappearing while still being alive, of becoming someone who no one would notice changing. But something inside me refused to let that be the ending of my story, and that is when I began to discover 3 small things. Things that saved me in ways I never expected. Simple things, almost too simple to believe, but they kept me here, steady, still going. I still remember sitting quietly after those thoughts, looking around this same room, wondering how life had become so small without me noticing. And maybe you understand this too, how easily days can shrink when no one is there to share them with you. I am telling you this not to scare you, but because I wish someone had told me earlier that living alone is not just about being alone in space. It is about what happens inside your mind when no one interrupts your silence. And that is where the real danger begins, but also where the change can begin too. I did not understand how quickly things could start to slip when you are living alone, not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but slowly, almost politely, like life is stepping away without wanting to disturb you. At first it was small things. I would put the kettle on and forget why I walked into the kitchen. I would sit down for a meal and realize I had not spoken a single word out loud all day. And then there were afternoons where the house felt so quiet that even the ticking clock started to feel too loud, too present. I did not think much of it at first. I told myself this is normal at my age. This is what happens. But deep inside, something was changing. I could feel it. My appetite became strange. Sometimes I would eat. Sometimes I would simply not feel like it. Not because I was unwell in the way people think of illness, but because there was no rhythm pushing me forward, no one waiting, no one asking. And I did not realize how important that someone was until it disappeared. Even my sleep started to change. I would wake up in the middle of the night and just lie there, listening to nothing, and somehow that nothing felt heavier than noise ever did. There is something I learned later, something researchers talk about in different words, that when people are alone for too long without connection or structure, the mind begins to slow down in ways that are not helpful. Memory becomes less sharp. Energy becomes uneven. Even the body starts to follow the mind into stillness. I did not know this then, I only felt it happening inside me. And I want to be very honest with you here. The hardest part was not hunger or tiredness. It was the emotional flatness, the feeling that nothing really mattered enough to start the day properly. I would look at simple tasks like making the bed or stepping outside, and they would feel strangely heavy, not physically, but in meaning, as if the purpose behind them had faded away. I remember one afternoon sitting by the window, watching people pass outside, and realizing I had not spoken to anyone properly in 2 days, maybe more. I tried to laugh at it, but I could not, because it did not feel like a joke. It felt like a warning I was not paying attention to. That was the real stake for me. Not loneliness itself, but what loneliness slowly turns you into when it is left unchecked. And I did not want to become that version of myself, quiet, fading, just existing inside a house that still looked alive from the outside. There was a moment, I remember it very clearly, when I realized something had shifted in me in a way I could not ignore anymore. I had been sitting in my chair by the window, the same chair I always used, and I was just there, not really thinking, not really resting either, just suspended in time. And then it struck me. I had not spoken a single full sentence out loud for 2 days, maybe even longer. I said something to myself then, just a few words, and my own voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone I had not seen in a long time. I almost startled myself, and then I tried again, just to hear it properly, and I realized how quickly silence had begun to erase parts of me I did not even know were fading. That was the first real turning point, because up until that moment I had been accepting everything as normal. The quiet days, the slow mornings, the meals I sometimes skipped without noticing. I told myself this is just aging, this is just life now. But that day, something in me refused that idea, just quietly, without drama, but firmly. I stood up from that chair slowly, and I remember holding on to the window frame for a moment, not because I was weak, but because I felt uncertain, like I had been drifting without realizing how far I had gone. And I said to myself, Helen, you cannot keep living like this. And that is when I began my first small change, something so simple that I almost dismissed it, but it became the beginning of everything that followed. I decided that no matter what, I would give my day a shape again, even if no one else saw it, even if it felt silly at first. So I started with one small thing. I began speaking out loud again, not to anyone, just to myself, while making tea, while opening the curtains, while moving through the house. I would describe what I was doing. Now I am boiling water. Now I'm opening the window. It may sound small, even strange, but hearing my own voice again brought something back inside me, something I did not realize I had lost. And slowly, very slowly, I started to feel less invisible in my own life, because I was no longer moving through the day in silence. I was participating in it again, even if it was only with my own voice at first. That was the beginning of my first saving thing, not something big, not something dramatic, but something that reminded me I was still here, still present, still able to begin again. After that first small change, something interesting began to happen. I started to understand that I could not rebuild my life with big actions. I had to do it with very small ones, the kind that almost feel too simple to matter, but matter deeply when you're living alone. So, I created something for myself, without even calling it a system at first. I simply began to shape my mornings and evenings, gently, carefully, like I was holding something fragile that could easily break if I rushed it. I stopped waking up and just drifting into the day. Instead, I gave my morning a beginning. I would sit up in bed, slowly, and take a moment just to breathe and acknowledge that I was still here. Then I would make my tea at the same time every day. Not because I had to, but because it gave my morning a point to begin from. I started opening the curtains at the same moment, letting the light come in, even on days I did not feel like it, especially on those days. And I noticed something very quiet happening inside me. My mind began to settle, not instantly, not magically, but gradually, like water becoming still after being disturbed. There was less confusion in my thoughts, fewer moments where I felt lost to my own day. In the evenings, I did the same thing. I created a closing rhythm. I would wash my cup. I would straighten the room a little. And I would sit for a few minutes just to let the day end properly. Not rushed, not ignored, but acknowledged, as if I was telling myself, "This day has been lived." It sounds so small when I say it like this, but I need you to understand when you live alone. Structure is not just organization. It becomes emotional support. It becomes something that holds you when there is no one else to do it. There were still lonely moments. Of course there were. I am not going to pretend they disappeared, but they no longer swallowed the whole day. They became moments inside a structure, not the structure itself, and that made all the difference. I began to feel something I had not felt in a while, a sense of steadiness, like I was gently guiding my own life again instead of being carried by confusion. And I did not realize it at the time, but this simple rhythm, morning and evening, was quietly becoming one of the first things that saved me, keeping me from slipping too far into that slow fading I had felt before. Even with that routine, there were still days, very quiet days, where I would sit in the house and feel something inside me go still in a way I did not like. Not peaceful stillness, but empty stillness, the kind that makes time feel stretched and heavy at the same time. I remember one afternoon clearly. I had done everything right. I had my tea. I had opened the curtains. I had followed my little routine step by step. And still, I sat there and felt completely alone in a way that words do not explain easily. And that is when I realized something important. Structure can hold your day, but it cannot fully hold your heart. That was the second turning point for me, because I had to admit to myself that I needed something more, something human, something that reminded me I was still part of the world outside these walls, even in the smallest possible way. At first I resisted this idea. I told myself I was fine on my own, that I did not want to bother anyone, that I had lived enough life to manage quietly. But the truth is, quiet can become too quiet, and I was beginning to feel that. So I made a very small decision, not a dramatic one, not something that changed everything overnight, just a small step. I started allowing small human contact back into my days. It began with simple things. I would say hello to the neighbor more often. I would speak a little longer at the shop when I went out. I would ask a question instead of just nodding and leaving. And sometimes I would pick up the phone and call someone, even if it was just for a few minutes. And something surprising happened. Those short moments, those very ordinary conversations, started to bring a kind of warmth back into my day. Not excitement, not noise, but warmth. Like a small light being turned on in a cold room. I began to notice that I felt less closed in after speaking to someone, even briefly. It did not fix everything, but it softened something inside me, something that had become too tight without me realizing it. There is a truth I learned slowly. You do not need long conversations to feel connected. Sometimes even a few sentences spoken to another human being can remind you that you are still visible in the world, still part of it, still alive in it. And that realization, simple as it was, became the second thing that began to save me, quietly pulling me back toward connection. One small moment at a time. Even after I began speaking to people more, I still had moments where the house would feel too large, too quiet, as if the walls themselves were listening instead of living. And I would sit there and realize something unsettling, that even connection in small doses is not enough, unless you also have something inside you that gives meaning to the day itself. That was when I understood the third thing, and I did not understand it all at once. It came slowly, like most important things in life do. There was a period where I was still doing everything I had learned, my routine, my small conversations, but there was still a kind of emptiness in between everything, like the hours were connected, but not truly filled. And I began to ask myself quietly, what am I doing all this for? That question stayed with me, not in a painful way, but in a steady, persistent way, until I could not ignore it anymore. So I began doing something very simple, something that gave my days a sense of meaning again. I chose one small purpose for each day, just one, not something grand, not something impressive, something human. Some days it was writing a small note to someone I cared about, even if I never sent it. Some days it was tidying a corner of the house that I had been ignoring. Some days it was cooking something properly just for myself, sitting down and treating it like it mattered and because I mattered. And slowly, something inside me began to change again. I started to feel less like I was waiting for the day to pass, and more like I was participating in it, even in small ways. There's something powerful about purpose at any age, but especially when you are older, because it does not need to be big to be real, it only needs to exist. I remember one morning, I wrote a short note to myself, just a reminder that I was still capable of shaping my own day, and I placed it near the window, and every time I passed it, I felt a little more anchored, a little more steady. And I realized then, loneliness does not disappear just because you fill your time. It begins to soften when your time has meaning inside it. That third thing, that small sense of daily purpose, became something I relied on more than I expected. Not as a task, but as a quiet reminder that even in a small life, even in a quiet house, there is still something worth doing, something worth caring about. And that was enough to begin bringing me back to myself again. There was a day I will never forget, because it felt like everything I had been holding together inside me finally became too heavy. It was an ordinary morning, nothing unusual about it. I had done my routine. I had spoken a few words to myself. I'd made my tea. I'd even exchanged a short conversation the day before with a neighbor. Everything on the outside looked fine. but inside I felt something deeper, a kind of exhaustion that was not about the body. I sat down in my chair, and for a long time I just stayed there, not moving, not thinking clearly, just feeling the weight of all the quiet days I had been carrying. And I remember thinking, is this all there is now? And that thought, it scared me more than I expected. Not because I was afraid of aging, I have lived long enough to understand that part of life, but because I realized how close I had come to simply existing without meaning, without feeling like I was truly part of my own life anymore. And that was the moment everything inside me softened, not broke. Softened, because I stopped fighting the feeling and started listening to it instead. And in that stillness, I understood something very clearly. All three things I had slowly built. My routine, my small connections, my daily purpose were not separate things at all. They were holding me together, like three quiet threads keeping me from unraveling completely. I began to see it so clearly in that moment. Living alone does not destroy you immediately. It does something quieter than that. It removes structure first, then connection, then meaning, until you are left sitting in a life that still looks normal from the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. But I also realize something else, just as important. It can be reversed, slowly, gently, one small decision at a time. I remember sitting there, placing my hand over my chest, and saying softly to myself, "You are still here, Helen. You are still here." Not as comfort, but as truth, something I needed to hear out loud. And in that moment, I did not feel completely healed, not suddenly changed, but I felt something return, a small sense of presence, like I had stepped back into my own life again instead of watching it from a distance. That was the climax for me, not a dramatic rescue, but a quiet realization that I had not lost myself completely. I had only drifted, and I could still find my way back, slowly, one small step at a time. After that day, something in me became gentler toward myself, not suddenly strong, not suddenly fixed, but gentler, like I was no longer afraid of my own silence the way I used to be. I began to understand something I wish I had known earlier in life. Living alone is not the real problem. The real problem is when you stop shaping your days, when you stop reaching outward in even the smallest ways, and when you stop giving your own life a reason to feel alive. I started to see my three small things not as fixes, but as anchors, simple anchors that kept me steady. My routine gave my day a shape, so I was not drifting from morning into night without noticing. It gave me a beginning and an ending, and that alone changed more than I can explain easily. My small connections, those brief conversations, those few spoken words to another human being, reminded me I was still part of the world, still visible, still connected in ways that did not require effort or perfection, just presence. And my daily purpose, even something as small as writing a note or tidying a corner, gave my life meaning again, not large meaning, not dramatic meaning, but quiet meaning, the kind that keeps a person going without them realizing how important it is. When I look back now, I do not think I was broken. I think I was simply unanchored, and I did not understand it at the time. But slowly, I learned how to anchor myself again, not perfectly, not every day, but enough to keep going. There are still quiet days, I will not lie to you about that, but they no longer feel like empty space. They feel like part of a rhythm I understand now. And I want to say this gently to anyone listening, especially if you're living alone or thinking about what that might feel like one day. Do not wait for loneliness to become unbearable before you begin to respond to it. Do not wait until silence feels heavy. Start small, very small. A routine, a conversation, a purpose for the day. Because these things are not just habits. They are ways of reminding yourself that you are still here, still part of life, still able to shape your own experience. And before I end this, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt that kind of quiet loneliness where life feels like it is happening around you instead of with you? And what do you think would help you the most in those moments? I would really like to hear your thoughts, truly. And if this spoke to you, please like and subscribe for more stories like mine. If I stay with you a little longer, there is one more thing I want to say. Something that does not always fit into a neat lesson or a simple story, but it matters deeply to me now. When you live long enough, you begin to see that life does not change in loud moments. It changes in quiet decisions, the ones nobody claps for, the ones nobody notices, the ones you almost dismiss because they feel too small to matter. I used to think change had to feel dramatic, like a turning point you could clearly mark on a calendar. But now I understand. Most of my healing came from ordinary repetition, doing small things again and again, even when I did not feel like it. There were mornings I did not want to follow my routine, but I did it anyway, not perfectly, just enough. There were days I did not feel like speaking to anyone, but I still said hello, even if my voice was quiet. There were evenings when purpose felt unnecessary, but I still chose something small to complete, just to remind myself I could. And over time, these small choices built something inside me that I did not expect. They built trust, trust with myself, that I would not abandon my own day, that I would not disappear into silence without trying to return. I think that is what living alone teaches you, not fear, but awareness. Awareness of how easily you can drift, and how gently you must bring yourself back, again and again. Now when I sit in my home, I no longer feel that heavy emptiness I once felt. There is still silence, yes, but it is different now. It feels like space rather than absence, like breathing room instead of disappearance. I still have moments where I pause and think about how far I have come, not in a proud way, but in a quiet, grateful way, because I did not need to become someone new. I only needed to remember how to stay connected to my own life. And maybe that is what I want you to take from my story. Not that living alone is easy, but that it is not hopeless either. There are always small ways back, always something you can do today that gently pulls you forward again. So before I go, I want to ask you this. Have you ever experienced a moment where life felt too quiet or too distant? And what is one small thing you think could bring you back to yourself in those moments? I would truly love to hear your thoughts. If my story stayed with you, please like and subscribe for more stories from me, Helen.